get a new car, or I could get a new suit, or a new toy to play with, or whatever. So all these things that we want, and it's like we have so much control over our wealth, and each one of us are wealthy. We have to understand what wealth is. The amount of money that we have that flows through our families is amazing. But in fact, it's astounding when you compare it to other parts of the world. We are a very wealthy nation, and even our most impoverished in the United States of America is wealthy compared to most of the world. And so when we keep that perspective, but we like to control that wealth, and we do the things that make us happy. And yet what Solomon is saying is that God is the one who gives the power to enjoy it. And I think the reason is because God becomes really the true meaning of our wealth. It ought to be used and directed toward bringing glory and honor to God in everything that we do. And when we do that, that's where our true joy and happiness in the wealth that we have comes from. It's really not in the new floors in the house. It's really not in the new glass packs on your car or whatever. It's really in bringing glory and honor to God. Now, you say, well, does that mean that we have to spend every extra dollar we have on God? No, it means that whatever possessions we have, we use to bring glory and honor to God. It's not about me, it's about Him. And so God, to some people, God does not give them the power to enjoy it. And what happens is that what they have, they collect, they hoard, they save until they die, and then what happens? It all goes to the next guy. Now, the next guy may be their son or their daughter, or aunt, uncle, cousin, whatever, but it's going to somebody else. And so even though he calls them a stranger, it may be someone that we actually know, but the idea is they're strangers not to the person, they're a stranger to the wealth. They're not the ones who worked for it. They're not the ones who invested to get it. They're not the ones who put the effort in and the energies in. They're a stranger to that wealth, but they will enjoy that wealth in that time. And so if a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with things, or with life's good things, he also has no burial. I say that a stillborn child is better off than him. We think of the tragedy of those who are stillborn. Have you ever spent time in cemeteries and graveyards? When I was a kid, we lived out in the country. We were about 3 miles from a paved road. And it wasn't a gravel road we lived on. It was a dirt road. Oftentimes grass growing up down the center of the road. But where we lived, you could walk through the pasture. That's what we did. You could walk through the pasture, and about half a mile there was a cemetery. In fact, it was a very large cemetery. It was called the Pleasant Hill Cemetery, still there today. It was a free cemetery. You didn't have to buy a burial plot. You could walk in and go to the fringes of the cemetery, and there were concrete blocks. They were painted blue on one side and red on the other. And if there was a blue one and that's where you wanted to be married, you flipped it over. and that became your plot. And you'd go tell the guy across the street, hey, I put my name down on that plot. That cemetery had dates going back into the 1700s, which was a long way for Oklahoma. Because, that's a long way. But my brother and I and our friends would go and we would read those tombstones. I bet in the years that we would spend out there, through the years, the time we spent out there, we probably read every marker 2 or 3 times. We'd bring friends over there. Oh, you got to come see this one. Come see right there. See, the birthday and the death day are the same day. It's a stillborn. It always amazed us. Or we would go and look for those that, the birth date and the death date were 100 years or more apart. You see that? We were astounded by those days. Solomon says that a child that is stillborn is better off than the man who lives many years and has hundreds of children. but his soul is not satisfied with life's good. It's not that he has a lot of kids, although that may make him unhappy, I don't know. It's not that he has a lot of kids or that he has a lot of money that is his downfall, but it is the fact that he is not satisfied. Satisfaction. Too often, we're always looking for the next. The next. Tremper Longman, in his commentary, described it as the motto of modern humanity can be summed up in one word. More. More money. More friends. More time. More. We just want more. And yet God is constantly telling us, be content. Be content, be content. What was it Solomon would say in Philippians? He says, I have learned both how to be abased and how to abound. To have plenty and to go hungry. He's learned contentment in both of those because the lessons that we learned as preaching through Philippians is a lesson that needs to be repeated often and loudly from us. And it simply says this, that when our happiness and our enjoyment is dependent on God, it doesn't matter what our circumstances are and how they may change, we can still find enjoyment and contentment in God. But when our happiness and enjoyment is attached to our circumstance, it will be as fickle as our circumstance. Don't let more be your motto. Solomon says that we need to learn contentment. Otherwise, the stillborn is better off than we are. Why? For the stillborn comes in vanity and goes in darkness. And in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun nor anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to the one place. Death, the great equalizer. The graveyard is the leveling field. And so the stillborn will end up in the same cemetery as the rich man, even if he lives 1,000 times over, he says. It's not enough to make up for the difficulties of life. Why was the stillborn so blessed? Well, because he didn't see the sun. He didn't see the inequity and the injustice. He didn't see the unfairness of life. He wasn't haunted by seeing those that he loved die or go through a terrible illness or sickness to the point where they die in the end and were in great pain up until that day. He doesn't have to go through that. That stillborn never knows the sun nor anything. And so therefore he finds greater rest. And so he says, even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good. Why can he not enjoy good? And I think this he is back to the rich man, not the child. Even though he, the rich man, should live 1,000 years twice over, well, surely if he got to live that long, that would bring great joy and happiness to his life, right? Yet he enjoys no good. What is it, do you suppose, is hindering him from enjoying good? He doesn't know God? Yeah. Probably. Part of it anyway. What does he say it is in the context, though?
He's already looking for the next life.
That's right. He's never satisfied. There's an old saying, some of you have probably heard it, the grass is always greener where? On the other side. And the idea was that on the other side of the fence, the cow looks over there and the grass is always greener over there, right? And so they find a way to stick their head between the fence rails or the barbed wire, and they oftentimes get caught because they can't get back. But the grass sure was good over there for that 5 or 10 minutes they were grazing on the other side of the fence. That's the idea. And so the reason why he cannot enjoy good is because even when he accumulates something, he doesn't give himself the time to enjoy what he's accumulated. He's already looking for the next, and the next, and the next. It's how life sometimes treats us. Do not all go to the same place. I don't think the preacher is trying to expose some human right that we have that is ignored by God when he doesn't give us the power to enjoy life. Rather, he is exposing a basic human need which only God himself can fulfill. Some needs the world cannot fulfill. There's nothing the world can do to touch them. Other needs can be remedied for a little while or in a little quantity, but ultimately God has put eternity into our hearts. Remember that phrase from chapter 3 and verse 11 is this intrinsic longing that humanity has for God, to be in the presence of God, for eternity. And so that's the idea of this, put eternity into our hearts. And I've said it many times over, but it's one of my favorite phrases or the favorite pictures. When we are born and as we grow, there is a God-shaped hole in everyone's heart. And only God can go in that hole and make us feel fulfilled. Now, we try to, cram the square peg in the round hole. We take things of the world and we try to put those in our God hole in our heart, and they just don't quite fit. They may remedy a little bit, but until we actually put God in his place in our heart, then we will not find true happiness. There will be no enjoyment on this earth. And you know what the stillborn never has to do? The stillborn never has to try to fill that hole. That's basically a hole that we're born filled with. And as we get older and sin and depart from God, that's when we remove that piece out of our heart. And the stillborn never has to struggle to put God back in the place. He's at one with God. We talk about those who are lost, and we are trying to reach out and save them. But when we look at children, young children, babies, and infants, we're not looking at someone who needs salvation. They don't need to be saved because they're safe in their present condition. He is better off than the man who has opened that hole in his heart and cannot find a way to fill it again. All the toil of man is for his mouth. Yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage has the wise man over the fool? What does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Here the preacher begins to answer some looming questions, we might say, concerning wealth. Why work at all if wealth is so meaningless? You're not going to like the answer. We work to eat. We eat to gain strength to work so that we can eat. Surely there's more to life than eating to work and working to eat, right? No, that's basically it. If a man will not work, neither let him eat. What was the curse in Genesis 3:19 when Adam and Eve had fallen? What did he tell him? By the sweat of your brow you will eat your bread. You will work to eat. All of the toil of man is for his mouth. You will work so you can eat. Why do you want to eat? So you be strong enough to work. Why do you work? So you can eat. Kind of reminiscent of the beginning of the book of Ecclesiastes when he's talking about the treadmill of life. We just keep going and going and going, and it doesn't seem like anything changes or we're really going anywhere. Life marches on in its monotony, and part of that monotony is we work to eat and eat to work and work to eat to work.
Up until about, say, 100 years ago, people had to work to survive.
think that's another reason that people are so unsatisfied nowadays because they don't technically have to work.
Well, we do, but we have moved away from a barter system. We've moved away from a subsistence system to more of a reliance system where we all rely on one another to do their part. The farmer works to grow grain to feed not just his family, but to feed a community. But he lives in a house that was built usually by somebody else, and he uses electricity that's made in a different place than his farm. And so he relies on others, and others rely on him. And so we have this more of a symbiotic relationship within our communities. That goes to a grand scale because not only are we talking about the staples and necessities of life, but we all pretty much enjoy our luxuries too, right? In some ways. We were in Oklahoma, and I was talking to Julie's cousin. He's a couple of years younger than us, but he's a man. He's got 3 sons and a house. He drives a truck for a living. But one of the things he does is he has cows to play with. He doesn't have to have the cows. He makes some money off of them. But he was driving this Kubota tractor, and it wasn't a big one or anything. Didn't have a cab or anything like that. And most of the tractors around that place through the years have been beaten up and torn up and had metal welded on the side to keep it going and things like that. But his tractor looked nice and new. And I said, "Man, how long have you had that?" And he'd already had it like 7 years or something. I mean, it was quite old compared to the way it looked. And he said, "But you know what I want? I want a tractor that's got a cab that closes, so when it's hot, I can have air conditioning on the inside." All right? Any of you guys that are farmers ever have a tractor with no cab or no umbrella and want an umbrella? Or have an umbrella and want the cab? See? And yet when we look at farming, that's the simplicity of life. That's the beauty of farming, is you're at one with nature, and yet we want to close ourselves off from it in a tractor with a cab sometimes, right? Nothing wrong with that, but understand who made the cab. The cab came from someone else doing their job, and so we rely on one another. And that means that we rely on one another's work. Someone worked to build that tractor. Someone worked to produce the food. Someone worked to give the electricity. Someone is always working somewhere to bring not just the needs, but even the luxuries to our homes. And so we are dependent on them. Now, what has happened is in the way that we have, y'all remember in the Little House on the Prairie books, right? And when they were going to make bread, they went to the storage where they had wheat, the seed. Actual wheat seed, and they would bring it in, and they would grind it, right, into flour, and then they would make that flour into bread or biscuits, and they would bake it in the oven. And of course, to make the oven work, they had to go out and chop wood and burn wood in the oven. It was a huge process, and by the time you finished breakfast, you were already starting really on dinner. You had to, in order to get everything done in time. So what we've done is we've created bakeries, and someone else is making the bread all day, and they've sliced it up, put it in a package, and you can go buy it, be back home in 5 minutes for $2 or whatever bread costs today. And it saves time. And the idea was, when you save time, what do you get to do with it? Spend more time with your family. You don't have to be working all the time. What do we do with it in reality? We text. Sometimes we text. I'll tell you what a lot of people do with the extra time. They work more. And work more and work more and work more and work more. And that's the rat race, not just of American society. That is the rat race of humanity. And that's what Solomon is telling us. All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. Even if you want to say, well, his appetite here is more than just, what goes in his stomach. It's his appetite for things, the appetite for accumulating stuff. I was talking to a guy while we were on vacation, and he called himself a hoarder. Now, to me, that's a bad thing. Be like saying, I'm a murderer, being proud of it. I'm a hoarder. And sure enough, went to his house, and guess what? He was a hoarder. And, the old bumper sticker, at the end of life, he who has most toys wins. There are people who live and die by that motto. They're never satisfied with what they have. So even if you want to put it in the realm of things, we work to get things, we get more things to work and work to get more things. It's still the same thing. We're working to eat. What advantage has the wise man over the fool? And what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? It is not in wisdom. The fool, for example, he says, the fool and the wise man die. If you're wise, you may be wise enough not to do foolish things and die an early death, but one day you will still die. The fool may attempt all kinds of crazy stunts, die in early age, but they will meet in the grave. The wise man ought to have greater gain, but that isn't always the case even, right? Remember these words back earlier in the book. He says, then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceived that the same event happens to all of them. Chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. Or when Solomon said, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. 1 and verse 18. What advantage? Remember that. That's the question. What advantage? What advantage has the wise man? And this is the same idea of what advantage, what does the poor man have? What advantage does the poor man have? Now, listen, the poor, those who are in poverty, have a choice. They can live in such a way to keep themselves poor, or they can clean themselves up, learn how to conduct themselves before the living, before other people, gain a better job, or get a living that gets them out of the streets and out of poverty. And let's say a man does that, goes from homelessness, works his way to a point where he's not only no longer homeless, but the home he has is magnificent. And it's happened. There's the rags to riches story has happened in reality, not just in literature, many times over. But what happens to him? Same thing that happens to the man who never learns how to conduct himself before others. Same thing that happens to the wise man, the same thing that happens to the fool. The poor man is wise in that he knows how to conduct himself or walk before others, but even this is of no real advantage. Others do not save us, but the question assumes a negative response. There is no advantage. There's no advantage that the wise man has over the fool. Advantage as far as eternity goes. What does the poor man have? Well, there's no advantage, not in the realm where it means something. If the poor man learns to conduct himself impeccably before others, gains wealth, the wealth is of no advantage to him. That's this whole section, that wealth is not what brings our advantage. Better in the sight of the eyes, or better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. And that's what Reed said a moment ago. He's always looking for the next field to buy. The inability to be satisfied with what you have, content with the things that we have. This also, he says, is a striving after a vanity and a striving after the wind. This becomes the clarification for the lack of advantage for the wise man or for the poor man, is their inability to be satisfied. It's better to find satisfaction in what you have than always searching for more. It makes no difference what status your life is. Learn to be content. Carol? The what? Yeah, they are the window to the heart. Oftentimes, in fact, when he says, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world, the lust of the eyes is the first thing. Lust of the flesh, the vainglories, the pride that is in life itself. And that's 1 John 2:16. Our eyes are the window to the soul. The impurity, the greed, the desire for more and more and more often begins with the eyes. So the lesson, obviously, we need to learn to find contentment. Whatever has come has already been named and is known, and it is known what man is, that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity, and what is the advantage to man? And so he's still asking the idea of the advantage, what is good, what is profitable to him. Whatever has come in the creation, including us, mankind, he says we are named and is known what we are. In other words, what's here is already here. He said it earlier in a different way. There is nothing new under the sun. Right? The universe is what it is. Whatever anomalies that we cannot explain or questions that remain after our investigation and studies, they're just going to remain. They're there. They're the secret things that rest with God, Deuteronomy 29 and verse 29. There are some things that are just past our finding out. So does that mean we don't search? No, of course we search. Why do we search? What drives us to search? We're alive.
We know we're alive, so we know we got to do something.
Yeah, just being alive and seeing things around it piques our curiosity. We want to find out how things work, right? Taking something apart to see what makes it tick. We want to do that with our universe. Now, obviously, some people have greater curiosity than others, but that's what drives us to search for knowledge. In the last few decades, there's been a resurgence in atheism, a neo-atheism, as you might call it. Guys like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Dennett. These men not only do not believe in God, they hate the very concept of God and anyone who believes in God. And so they have been debating guys like William Lane Craig and Ravi Zacharias and others who have dedicated their lives to philosophy. Sometimes they're called Christian philosophers, but it's really just the study of gaining knowledge, understanding knowledge. That's what philosophy is. And if you're honest with the evidence, it leads you to the conclusion that there is a God. It's hard to deny that, and yet you have these who not only deny it but hate that. It's despicable to them, and so they have clashed through the years. And one of the things that those who are atheists believe or teach or despise is that religion throughout history, they say, has stunted man's intelligence and growth of knowledge. That because we say God exists, that we are no longer searching for the answers about why things happen. And when we can't explain it, we just fold our hands and say, well, God does it. They refer to it as the God of the gaps theories. The gaps in our knowledge that we have not come to, that we are content to simply say God knows and we don't search anymore. And yet, when they make this argument in public debates and formal discussions, they're always met with resistance to actual history that shows the greatest, most beneficial discoveries throughout history for mankind have been made by those who believe in God. Jennifer?
These people who are these scientists and think they're full of knowledge, it comes across to me as they think they're creating something new. When you discover something, it's new. Well, no, it was always there. You just learned about it. And so I think people get a lot confused thinking that things are changing and they're really not. I had one class about ethics and they said one of my last assignments was, has ethics changed? I was like, no, ethics haven't changed. The way we respond to it is what's changed. And this sounds like what Solomon is saying. There's nothing new. We just are discovering.
We discover it. We discover the truths that govern the universe and how things work. When you didn't invent the clock, but maybe as a kid you took the clock apart to figure out how it works and figured it out and put it back together. Doesn't mean you invented the clock. It means that you learned what someone else had invented. When we dissect the universe and figure out how DNA works or how cell replication works or mitosis or meiosis and haploids, and when we put all those names and things together and we figure out how things work, we didn't create it. We didn't invent it. We just discovered what has worked all along. And there's going to be some things that we don't know. Not today, anyway. And we may discover them in 5, 10, 20, 100, 1,000 years if the world lasts that long. We might actually discover some of those gaps. But there are some things that are the secret things which remain with God. Remember, Job longed to take his case to God. If I could just bring my case before God, he would see how unjust my suffering is. And yet, it was God who was greater and bigger and higher than Job and higher than us for us to be so familiar with him. In fact, I think God is the one who is stronger than he is. As much strength and knowledge as we have, we are not able to dispute with one who is stronger than us. Job could not dispute with God. And so think about things when God said, for example, woe to him who strives with him who formed him, a pot among earthen pots. Does the clay say to him who formed it, what are you making? Or your work has no handles. Woe to him who says to a father, what are you begetting? Or to a woman, with what are you in labor? Isaiah 45, verses 9 and 10. We have a tendency to want to dispute with God, question the inequities of life, the unfairness, the knowledge and ignorance that we are, the lack of knowledge or ignorance that we have. But we can't dispute with God. The more words, no amount of words that we give to God give us an advantage against God. It simply doesn't work that way. For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him? Who knows? That's the question. And then, who can tell? These delve into man's ability to answer life, to figure out those gaps of knowledge. Who knows speaks of man's wisdom in himself. Can he ferret out every question or every answer and probe every question? Of course not. We rely on the knowledge, intellectual discoveries of others before us. That's what school is all about, right? We send kids to school to learn the basics of life so that when they get older, they can go into a job and they can learn other things that school doesn't tell us. And people that go this direction may not learn anything new about something over in this area. But someone over in this area that's discovering these truths may never venture over into this area. You see, that's the way life is. We can't get every question. No one person can. He is left then with a lack of understanding about life in general, his vain life that is brief and faint like a shadow. What's the definition of life? Scientifically speaking, You realize we don't actually define it. We give qualities. You remember back learning the qualities of life, things like growth and movement and reproduction and things like that. Those were qualities of life. But to actually identify the bios, the life itself, we have difficulty in that. Who can tell? The other question, who can tell man what will be after him? It asks, who can teach man? If one cannot find it all out himself, can someone teach him? Again, the possibility is cut off. The preacher is cutting off every exit, every possibility except one. Man can't come to it. God does. Faith. Faith which culminates in Christ Jesus. I'll leave you with Derek Kidner said, it is a double bewilderment. He is left with no absolute values to live for, what is good, not even any practical certainties, what will be, to plan for. And so what does he do? He must trust in God. That will be the ultimate conclusion when we get to chapter 12. Next week we'll start in chapter 7. A good name is better than precious ointment.